Hello, students. Today we are going to do the chapter Hearts and Hats, and it is written by O. Henry. At Denver, there was an influx of passengers into the coaches on the eastbound BM Express at Denver. Now, Denver is the name of station, okay? And there was an influx of passengers. Influx means they were in large number into the coaches of the eastbound. Eastbound means it's this train is starting from the west and it's going towards the east of America, where there is Washington or New York. So this B and M Express, that's the name of the train, okay? It's going towards the east coast. In one coach there sat a very pretty young woman dressed in elegant taste. So there is one pretty young woman sitting in the coach, and she's dressed in elegant taste. What do you mean by elegant? Graceful and stylish, and surrounded by all the luxurious comforts of an experienced traveler. Now she's surrounded by all the luxuries. That means she's from a very well-to-do family of an experienced traveler. So she's been traveling. She knows what is to be carried with her. Among the newcomers were two young men. So now two newcomers have come there, and they're two men, young men. Now one of handsome presence with a bold, frank countenance. So one of those men was very handsome looking presence with a bold, frank countenance. So he had very frank facial expression. Countenance is facial expression and manner. The other, a ruffled, glum-faced person. He looked very upset, very dull-faced, heavily built and roughly dressed. So he was very stout and roughly dressed. He was not dressed very well. The two were handcuffed together. Now these two men, they were handcuffed together as they passed down the aisle of the coach. Now what is the aisle here? It is a passage between rows of seats, okay? So as they passed down the aisle of the coach, the only vacant seat offered was a reversed one facing the attractive young woman. So there was no place, no seat vacant other than the seat that was opposite to this attractive young woman. Here the link couple seated themselves. Now here the link couple. Who is the link couple? Why is this phrase used here? Because they are linked because of the handcuffs, okay? So these two men, they seated there right in front of the attractive woman. The young woman's glance fell upon them with a distant, swift interest. Like as soon as these young men entered inside, this young woman, she just glanced at them, and there was disinterest at first. Swift looked, just a glance she gave, and she was not interested. Then with a lovely smile brightening her countenance, and then now the second look she gave, there was a lovely smile all of a sudden, brightening her countenance. Now this was brightening, her smile was brightening her facial expression, and a tender pink tingeing her rounded cheeks. So there was, like her cheeks became pink, like she was blushing. She held out a little grey gloved hand. So she was wearing a grey color glove on her hands. Now usually in those days only rich people used to wear, okay? So this tells you that she was from a rich family background. When she spoke, her voice, full, sweet and deliberate, proclaimed that its owner was accustomed to speak and be heard. So she was very confident, and she was accustomed, to whenever she speaks, the others should hear her. So that is vanity, yes. Well, Mr. Easton, if you will make me speak first, I suppose I must. So she says, she talks to the person who is one of those two young men, and she calls him Mr. Easton. That is his name. Well, Mr. Easton, if you will make me speak first, I suppose I must. She's saying, because you're not speaking, you're not coming forward to speak to me, so I have to take the privilege of talking to you. Don't you ever recognize old friends when you meet them in the West? So she's saying, what is this? Why don't you recognize me? Why don't you come and talk to me? So she's being a bit sarcastic here, because he did not recognize her and he didn't come and talk to her at first. The younger man roused himself sharply at the sound of her voice. So he just stood up, sharply all of a sudden, seemed to struggle with a slight embarrassment which he threw off instantly. So there was a struggle and there was a slight embarrassment. Okay, let's see why he's embarrassed. Which he threw off instantly, and he just kept it aside. He did not let it come out. And then clasped her fingers with his left hand. So usually when we are shaking our hands with the other person, it's usually we bring out the right hand, but this person, Mr. Easton, has given his left hand. It's Miss Fairchild. So he recognizes her name, okay, who she is. So he says, it's Miss Fairchild. He said with a smile, I will ask you to excuse the other hand. It's otherwise engaged just at present. So he says, I'm sorry, I cannot take my right hand. It is engaged at present. He slightly raised his right hand, bound at the wrist by the shining bracelet. Now, the bracelet, that is the handcuffs, were visible to the left one of his companion. The glad look in the girl's eyes slowly changed to a bewildered horror. Now she was confused, looking at the handcuffs. Before this, she had not noticed the handcuffs. The glow faded from her cheeks. So she was, glowing that time, and that glow from her face has faded. Her lips parted in a vague, relaxing distress. Now her lips opened and it parted in a vague. Vague is not clear. Relaxing distress. There was distress on her mind. What is this? Why is he wearing the handcuffs? Easton, with a little laugh as if amused, was about to speak again. So Easton was about to answer again when the other forestalled him. What do you mean by forestalled? Forestall means prevent by taking action first. So he forestalled him. So he stopped him. Maybe he just made a gesture of telling him to stop, and he stopped him. The glum-faced man had been watching the girl's countenance with veiled glances. Veiled glances means indirect looking at someone. Okay, so here with veiled glances from his keen, shrewd eyes, he was looking at, this person was looking at Miss Fairchild, and he stopped Mr. Easton when he was going to say something. So you have to remember these words like keen, shrewd eyes, you have to learn them well. So, you will excuse me for speaking, miss. So this is the glum-faced man who's speaking now. He says, excuse me for speaking, but I see you are acquainted with the marshal here. So he say, I see, I can understand that you know this marshal very well. If you will ask him to speak a word for me when we get to the pen. Now he requests her, will you please tell him to speak a word for me when we get to the pen. Pen here is the prison. He will do it, and it will make things easier for me there. So he requests her, please ask this marshal to speak a word for me, speak something good for me, so that it's easier for him at the prison. He lives there comfortably. He's taking me to Leavenworth prison, so that is the name of the prison that he's going. It's 7 years for counterfeiting. What is counterfeiting? Making illegal copies, forgery. Okay, so that's why he's been taken there. Oh, said the girl with a deep breath and returning color. Now she was relaxed. Why? Because she came to know that Mr. Easton was the marshal. So that is what you are doing out here, a marshal. So she was quite happy about it now. My dear Miss Fairchild, said Easton calmly, I had to do something. So he says, I had to do something in my life. Money has a way of taking winds onto itself. So money, it just flies, It gets over within no time. And it takes money to keep step with the crowd in Washington. So if you have to maintain your standard of living, so you have to earn money. You have to earn good money there. I saw this opening in the west. So there was a job opening, there was a vacancy there. And well, a marshalship isn't quite as high a position as that of ambassador. But who is ambassador? Ambassador is a person who represents your country. So he says this job profile is marshalship is much below an ambassador, and then he pauses there. You know, maybe before Miss Fairchild must have liked a person who was an ambassador, a very high profile person. But then, and he says, I'm a marshal, so he's comparing. I'm not an ambassador, he's being sarcastic here. The ambassador, said the girl warmly, doesn't call anymore. So she's saying that this ambassador doesn't call her anymore. He needn't ever have done so. So she says it did not require him to call. You ought to know that. She says you ought to know this. And so now you are one of these dashing Western heroes. So she's quite impressed with Mr. Easton, and she says you are a dashing Western hero, and you ride and shoot and go into all kinds of dangers. That's why she calls him a dashing Western hero, because he rides, he shoots, and he gets into all kind of dangers. That's different from the Washington life. She's saying this is very different from what you were doing earlier in your life. You've been missed from the old crowd. So she's saying the old friends of yours are missing you. The girl's eye, fascinated, went back, widening a little to rest upon the glittering handcuffs. So her eyes, they were quite fascinated by knowing that he's a marshal. But then when she saw the handcuffs, it widened a little. Don't you worry about them, miss, said the other man. All marshals handcuff themselves to their prisoners to keep them from getting away. Mr. Easton knows his business. So this is ironical. So when like she's looking, Miss Fairchild is looking at the handcuffs, and then her eyes widen. So this marshal says that it's okay, you don't have to worry about that, because this is what marshals have to do. They have to handcuff their prisoners, and because so that they don't get away. So he says Mr. Easton knows his business. So this is ironical. Okay, will we see you again soon in Washington, asked the girl. So she's asking, will we be able to meet again? Not soon, I think, said Easton. My butterfly days are over, I fear. So he says that I cannot move around everywhere. I have to perform my job. So I feel my butterfly days are over. Now this is ironical, because he means actually he's going to the prison. So, but here what he's trying to pretend that he has to do a job. So this line is ironical. I love the West, said the girl irrelevantly. Now what is she doing? She's trying to impress him. Okay, her eyes were shining softly. That is again impressing him. She looked away out of the car window. She began to speak truly and simply, without the gloss of style and manner. Now she came to her true self. She did not put on an act. Mama and I spent the summer in Denver. So her mother hand, she had spent the summer in Denver. She went home a week ago because father was slightly ill. So her mother had to leave because her father was not feeling well. I could live and be happy in the West. So she's trying to, give an indirect proposal to Mr. Easton. I think the air here agrees with me. So she says, I feel very comfortable here. Money isn't everything. So she says, but money isn't everything. But people always understand things and remain stupid. So she feels that Mr. Easton is not understanding her indirect proposal and is remaining stupid. Say, Mr. Marshall, growled the glum-faced man, this isn't quite fair. I'm needing a drink and haven't had a smoke all day. So now this other glum-faced man, he interferes, and he says, he calls Mr. Easton Mr. Marshall. He says, this is not fair. I need a drink. I need to smoke. Haven't you talked long enough? He says, you've been talking for such a long time. Take me to the smoker now. And now, out of India, these people are not allowed to smoke anywhere and everywhere. They have to go, if they want to smoke, they have to go to the smoker's room. Won't you? I'm half dead for a pipe, so he wants to have a pipe. The bound travelers, bound means they are bound to each other, they cannot move without each other, rose to their feet. They stood up. Easton with a small, slow smile on his face, and he had the same slow smile on his face. I can't deny a petition for tobacco, he said lightly. Petition is an appeal for tobacco. Now, the reason this glum-faced man had interfered because he wanted their conversation to be short and he doesn't want things to be revealed. I can't deny a petition for tobacco, he said lightly. It's one friend of the unfortunate. So he says this is only the friend. What is the only friend? That tobacco. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. Duty calls, you know. So he says goodbye and he says that duty is calling me. I have to perform my duty, so I should go. He held out his hand for a farewell. So to shake his hand, he just held out the hand. It's too bad you're not going east. So she says it's really bad. She's, like feeling bad that she has given an indirect proposal and he's not accepting it. She said, reclothing herself with manner and style. Now she comes back with a manner and style again. But you must go on to Leavenworth, I suppose. So she says, okay, I think you should go to Leavenworth and perform your duty. Yes, said Easton, I must go to Leavenworth. So he doesn't, change his mind and he says, yes, I have to perform my duty. The two men sidled down the aisle into the smoker, and they walked down the aisle and then into the smoker. Two passengers in a seat nearby had heard most of the conversation. So while the conversation was going on, there were these two passengers who were sitting in the seat nearby and they had heard everything. Said one of them, so one of them spoke, that Marshall's a good sort of chap. So he says that Marshall is a very good chap. Some of these Western fellows are all right. These Western people are good. Pretty young to hold an office like that, isn't he? Asked the other. So he says, don't you think he's very young? He cannot be a marshal. So it's very difficult to go to that stage so early at this point of time. Young, exclaimed the first speaker. So the first speaker said, young? Why? Oh, didn't you catch on? So he says, didn't you understand that? Say, did you even know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to the right hand? So he says, have you ever seen an officer or a marshal handcuff a prisoner to his right hand? So Mr. Easton was, his hand, the right hand was cuffed. So that means he was actually not the marshal, he was actually the prisoner. Thank you for watching. Like the video if you have understood and subscribe to my channel for the latest updates.